to bonus episode number 19 of the Blooms and Barnacles podcast, where we talk about everything related to not James Joyce's Ulysses. I'm Kelly.
I'm Dermot.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This is the 6th installment in our Dubliners series. I would say the anti-penultimate episode of the Dubliners series. $10 way of saying second to last.
Okay.
Because we already did The Dead.
Yeah.
Couldn't remember the name for a second there of the most famous one. Thanks for joining us. We're going a little out of sequence today because I want to give Ivy Day in the committee room and Grace standalone episodes since they're a bit longer. We are going to cover a painful case and a mother and offer our opinions on those and things we noticed. And let's get right into it. Tell me what you remember about A Painful Case by James Joyce.
I think it's the saddest of the stories.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Because it's a guy who's kind of trapped by his own moral code or framework or whatever, and some half-baked Nietzschean philosophy into not seeing what's right in front of him. He kind of has a get-out-of-jail-free card, throws it away, and it ends badly for everyone. Yeah.
You can go into more detail than that.
Okay, so it's a man who basically has a very monkish life, something I can relate to because I was very monkish for a long time. But he, unlike me, is very much like even more a creature of habit. So he just lives by himself, has simple tastes. Finally, through happenstance, meets a woman of his own age, and again described as really, really old, but they're both in their early 40s. They're not that old. Like, you could still expect 30 more years if you're lucky, Like, she has a daughter, and she seems to be trapped in a loveless marriage. She's clearly giving signals that she's interested in him, and he kind of doesn't reciprocate, but probably secretly wants to, but he's too insecure.
So you do think he's interested in her?
Yeah.
That he feels the same?
That was the vibe I got. It was between the lines, but
okay.
He wouldn't have spent that much time with her in those circumstances if there wasn't some kind of vibe going on. And he's described as reading like Nietzsche, so that's not a good idea for an amateur anyway. And he lets it be known that through behaviour anyway that he's not going to be involved with her. And then there's the awful thing, like 4 years later, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
So that's 4 years already, that even if things turn out differently, you've already wasted 4 years. He's having his, like usual, very simple breakfast where he tries to just eat somewhere quiet and avoid the madding crowd. And he sees the story of her death in the newspaper where she's fallen in front of a tram or a train, and probably a suicide. But again, it's left to your own devices if it is or not. Could have been an accident. Her body too weak to survive. Probably an impact that might have not killed her otherwise. So she's also described as very much like an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But again, she's been rebuffed by him, who she's clearly interested in, and he holds her in contempt because, she was dragging down my morals and all this kind of Catholic.
Do you think it's a genuine contempt?
No. No, it's surface level. That's the vibe I got. When he starts thinking about it, he realizes he's made a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I think so.
And I don't think he's a monster, but you can see how he's kind of been locked in. Like, convictions cause convicts, was the Robert Anton Wilson quote.
Convictions cause convicts.
Yeah.
Oh.
You have a conviction, you're a prisoner of your own thoughts.
Okay. Oh. Okay.
And T. Lawrence of Arabia said, you can argue with an opinion, but a conviction is best shot.
Okay. All right. So, a man of conviction. Yeah, I wondered how you saw James Duffy, because I think before I met you, you were a fairly monkish man yourself.
Yeah.
Did it any feelings arise in you?
Oh yeah, very recognizable, but I'm not closed off like in the way that he was, Like I wasn't really interested in pursuing relationships or anything, but I always said to people, like, if I meet somebody, I meet them, but I'm not going to go out on Tinder or Grindr or whatever trying to find somebody. So it's not a thing that I'm going to do. So, but if you meet somebody, then you meet them, and they meet you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And
I didn't run screaming for the hills.
No.
I think where I'd like to focus our discussion today is sort of a character study of James Duffy. I don't want to focus over much on the potential suicide of Sinico. That's definitely how I would read her actions. I would say a lot of criticism I read of this story does focus on him as a character and his characterization. Really a lot of blaming of him for Mrs. Sinico's ultimate fate. And she was a friend of Leopold Bloom, you know.
Okay.
Because he recalls when in Hades, in Ulysses, being in the graveyard the year before for Mrs. Emily Sinico's funeral. So that's where you get this suspicion that James Duffy may be the man in the Macintosh there to visit her grave. Just based on informal polls of our listeners, it's a popular theory among them.
He would be a lanky galoot based on the description of him in the book.
We recorded a full episode about that, so I don't want to get into it too much here, but Joyce did have a specific person from his life in mind when he wrote James Duffy, and it would be his brother, Stanislaus Joyce. Do you know much about Stanislaus?
Other than the outlines we've read about him, but I couldn't give you any biographical detail of him.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about his biography, but one thing that is pertinent to our discussion here is that James Joyce was a family man, and he felt that was the most important thing he did was to be a father, particularly. And Stanislaus, I think, was a lifelong bachelor. He was certainly a bachelor a lot longer than James approved of. And as such, James was very concerned about his brother and wrote the story in part as a cautionary tale, I think, for Stanislaus, which Stanislaus was fully aware of. He wrote about it in his biography of his brother called My Brother's Keeper. To start with this, the few things that Joyce took from his brother to model James Duffy would be his appearance. He's pretty much a spitting image of Stanislaus the way he's described. A big part would be the personality, and so these are things that Stanislaus himself points out. So these are things that are characteristics of James Duffy that come from Stanislaus. They would be an intolerance of drunkenness, a hostility to socialism. I actually would be interested to get your take would you describe yourself as a socialist?
Yeah.
Your take on James Duffy's dalliance with socialism. Let's see, James Duffy's habit of noting down short sentences on loose sheets of paper. Duffy's quote about men and women is one such. Do you remember this quote? Love between man and man is impossible because there must not be sexual intercourse, and friendship between man and woman is impossible because there must be sexual intercourse.
That sounds Nietzschean.
It's Joycean, but not.
But Nietzsche
not
said something similar about. I think he didn't think there could be platonic love between men.
Yeah,
and women.
that's a Stanislaus original though, and he goes on to say that the following Duffy traits came from James rather than himself, which among them would be the interest in Nietzsche and also the interest in Michael Kramer as a way of seeming intellectual. So other habits too that come from Stanislaus. First would be the keeping of a diary. So when they were living in Trieste, because, Joyce and Nora, famously ran off to Trieste, but Stanislaus followed in real life. James mined his brother Stanislaus's diary for ideas and different anecdotes and things. Stanislaus, in his words, said that his brother used him, quote, as a butcher uses his steel to sharpen a knife. And Stanislaus didn't really seem to mind. That might sound kind of scuzzy. I could go through my brother's diary and get all the dirt. But Stanislaus, I think, was an open book. Some incidents that might seem familiar that would come out of this was when Stanislaus was around 17, he did indeed attend a concert at the Rotunda where a charming woman who knew a lot about music struck up a conversation with him and kept it going in all the intervals. And then he did one other time bump into her randomly. But that's kind of where it ends.
Okay.
Yeah. James was, I think, quite a bit randier than Stanislaus, so just leave it at that. Maybe a little more romantically minded, too. Might have been like, oh, you should have gone for it. He met his wife on the street. James did. Yeah. So, but Stanislaus, I think that just wasn't his thing. Stanislaus also notes that Sinico or Sinico, I guess would be the Italian version, is a name specific to Trieste that he chose for his character here. I forgot I wanted to ask you about the socialism, so you mind if we go on a little cul-de-sac here? James Duffy notes that he was interested in socialism, went to some meetings, felt they were too focused on wages, and then the socialists fell to schisms and...
They split.
Yes, and then he lost interest, so...
The idea of the small socialist movement splitting into 3 groups, I was so relieved that doesn't happen anymore. But let it be said that this is a problem that the left has, because if you're on the right, let's say you're Burkean conservative and that you sort of like the way the system is, you just want it to be altered in your favor even more, but you don't really want to replace it with something radically different. So you have the advantage, but the person who wants to overthrow it and replace it, well, everybody has their own ideal state that they want. So there's going to be more people with a different plan for the future. And you know that once that, if you succeed, you're locked in for a very long time. So the left is, by its definition, going to be more fragmented. That just comes with the philosophical problems of making a new order. It would require usually like a strong man, like a Lenin type, to say, this is what we're going to do. But then the problem there is you're locked in. Once Leninism was locked in, the Soviet system was locked in. And then you got the fights between the Khrushchev reformers and the Brezhnev conservatives. And that just, again, fused until they were broken and they could not do the things that were required, and they collapsed. Roman Empire, kind of something similar.